first of all, congratulations for all your labor and thank you so much. We appreciate a lot your time. Now you are in Uganda. So what are the latest projects that African Youth Initiative is carrying out? And is the COVID affecting your process in any way?
Yeah, nice meeting you and good to join you from Lera in northern Uganda. I am very delighted to take part in these interviews, but also most importantly to benefit from the privilege of technology to still meet, even if it would have been a lot better in person. Yeah, I am the director for African Youth Initiative Network, which is a Ugandan-based youth organization, 16 years old, and our work has been on promoting the role of youth in peace and justice, with particular focus on supporting the victims and survivors of human rights violations. In this case, has been about supporting the victims of war, people who have been abducted, youth who have been abducted and recruited as child soldiers, have been forced to do many things and are going through severe emotional and physical needs of rehabilitation. So yeah, we have been over the years working to support the victims of war, providing medical rehabilitation, and so far we have supported up to 25,000 victims. These are people whose lips, nose, ears were cut off by the rebel as a form of torture and punishment. A lot of women were sexually abused, and a lot of people who sustained injuries as a result of torture, physical torture. And we give them opportunity to heal and recover. But also that has been key in terms of us promoting the role of youth in leadership, mobilizing youth and empowering them and training them to become leaders in peace building, leaders in community development, leaders in post-conflict recovery, and leaders in promoting the human rights. And that's why we've been very deeply involved in community development programs, but also humanitarian response. And currently we also have a support program for the refugees. My home area in northern Uganda currently hosts over 1 million refugees from South Sudan, some are from Central Africa, some are from Democratic Republic of Congo. They are all here in northern Uganda. And we have a lot of work we're doing in terms of supporting the communities, supporting the youth, supporting the population. Yeah.
Right, thanks. Can you tell us something more about this Peace Academy?
Few years ago, 2-3 years ago, we started conceptualizing our work because over the years, over 10 years, over 16 years of our work in peace building, we have learned how peace is possible. And also we have learned how to build a local capacity to address the local conflict challenges. And then we came up that 16 years of our work experience has taught us what works and what does not work. And that's why we have been able to critically think and develop new strategic platforms on how to mobilize and empower the local grassroots peace builders, the young people who are based in the community, the young people who are victims of war, the young people who are forced to live on so many occasions, surviving the effects, the impacts of conflict. And then we say, let us form ourselves a platform where we can bring integrated academic discipline, which are universally agreeable methods of peace building or peace and development with a local traditional African approaches to peace, because we know communities in Africa are together, are intact because of the local alternative peace building programs. And but there has always been a mismatch, a disconnection between international frameworks and the local approaches. In Africa, we have what we call Ubuntu. Ubuntu is about giving the human face of peace, human face of justice, and human face of development, not just about better system, better education, better structures, better societies, about the heart. Ubuntu is, I am because you are. You are because I am. And then we are all because of one another. It means alone you cannot go far. Alone you cannot bring all the development you want, but you need to work together with one another in order to bring about the change. And that's what we know. Ubuntu are not taught in any universities around the world. Ubuntus are rooted in African, traditional African approaches. And that works. It's less costly, it's, it's inclusive, it's for everybody, whether you're educated or uneducated, whether you're in rural or urban, whether you're young or old, whether you're a man or a woman. Ubuntu works for all. And these are the kind of things that there are many platforms, there are many approaches like Ubuntu that exists in African context. And that's why I say, let us set up a peace academy where we come and teach the international frameworks and the national frameworks as well as the local alternative. And that's why the academy is to bring the young people from different parts of the communities, train them to become leaders in peace building, build them to become actors in conflict mediation, but also they become drivers of change, positive change in the community, promoting more the spirit of peace and reconciliation. And this is the efforts that we want to say. Let us bring about promoting harmony to be the local alternative. And that's what we have when it comes to Ubuntu. And that's really the spirit of African Peace Academy.
Cool. Sounds perfect, Ubuntu. Like many African countries, Uganda continues to battle with its colonial legacies. How are these legacies affecting young people years later?
Many African countries, or as a continent, we are so caught up into the colonial legacy. And the colonial powers came in and thrived on people's division, the disunity, the disharmony, and the mistrust, the hatred, enmities. That's what they came and created. They put tribes against each other. They put regions against each other, put gender and culture against each other. And this is something that it took so long. Africa has been through too much. From the time, even before the colonial time, there was slavery, and there was slave trade. And then when slave trade came and went, then came in colonial times, came and divided and ruled the communities, the population. And this culture was deeply entrenched, was deeply rooted. It took away the trust, the mutuality, the tolerance that used to exist in African society. It took away all that and created the superiority, the ethnic superiority, the tribal supremacy, and the religious identity-based conflict, identity-based mistrust. This is the kind of thing that colonial powers came. Unfortunately, our society has not been helped enough to heal. Right. Reasons being there's still so much colonial interest, former colonial interest in Africa today. So they continue to be so strongly involved in African affairs, political affairs, economic affairs, socio-cultural affairs. So in so many ways, the colonial powers left, but their culture they brought did not go. The culture remained. And they continue to be manipulated because Africa, being a rich continent, there's so much raw materials. In short, Africa has what the world needs today in order for the world to thrive. In this case, technology, you need diamond, you need gold, you need all these complex natural resources which are here in Africa. And that's why it will always be a big issue on how can we bring ultimate peace in Africa with all this still stronger external interest in the continent. So this is a generational issue. We have one generation that has lived it, or they inherited the generation that has inherited the trauma. The generation is what we're going through, the generational transfer of trauma, where old people, out of anger, are transferring their anger and frustration and powerlessness and hopelessness to the young generation. And this is where the problem is. So youth in the continent continues to live in the backyard of colonial legacies, but also defined by heavy loads of mistrust and hatred and anger. And that's why we're saying, can we work hard and make sure we bring an end by breaking the chains and the cycles of this mistrust that has been there for way too long. So young people, they are caught up in dilemma. but also majority feel they want to move forward, but colonial legacy tied to politics that creates a lot of poverty, that's got a lot of mistrust, that's got a lot of tribalism, ethnicity, is where the Africa is held hostage. So yes, colonial powers left, but the colonial legacies and the colonial interest remains in the continent.
How did you suffer when you were young, this heritage?
Of course, as a young person who grew up in this part of the continent in Uganda, I grew up in the backbone of war, civil wars. As a child, it was an era of conflict where there was so much gun violence in many ways, in many forms and different trends. It became our lifetime. Of course, as a child, being exposed to gun violence every day, you feel you don't belong, you feel you're unwanted, you feel you're targeted, you feel you're marginalized by your own system, by your own government. And these are the kind of things that created a lot of suffering and pain, creating enormous amount of food insecurity, health insecurity, educational insecurity, humanitarian crisis. So we became a generation in need, a generation in need of food aid, medical aid, education aid. Everything was lacking. So as a child who grew up in the internally displaced people's camp in northern Uganda, it was tragic, it was painful because I grew up witnessing my age mates, my families, my friends being caught up, being attacked, being abducted, being killed, being sexually abused. And this is all the background and the reality that I grew up in. So as a child, I suffered. I am a victim of war myself. I'm also a victim of this political mistrust that has happened in my continent and my country for far too long. So yes, as a child, I'm a child witness of the painful history.
Right. So that's why you became a movement anti-war, or like became a figure of a peace in Uganda. You said in a lot of interviews that people usually used to laugh at you because of that.
Yes, of course, as a child, you also would wonder, is this the kind of life we're living? Are there people not studying in other communities? Are there people not, having freedom to walk free without fear for their life, to fear for what to eat, what to wear, where to sleep? And of course, amid these many sicknesses and diseases that came in, there were numbers of many things that I became exhausted. I was fatigued with my own suffering, and I thought that time will have to come when this nonsense of madness of war and conflict must stop, because it's creating just enormous amount of suffering. So it is something that we have to understand the reality and the dynamics that has been there for too long. Yes, we had to agree, in fact, to the truth that there is a moment that we need to bring an end to this. So my whole motivation came about when we say that now that we have suffered, enough is enough. What? Are we going to pick up the gun to create more suffering? Or we are going to be another people that brings an end to the suffering? So I chose to be an end of the suffering. And that's why instead of picking up the gun, I said, let us mobilize ourselves and form a force. And this was not a force to fight, but it was a force to promote peace. So it became a peace force. And we started an initiative called African Youth Initiative Network, which is an initiative that started out of pain, out of our own suffering. And it became a motivation to us because we were seeing the outcome of what we were doing was changing life, was restoring hope, but also to bring an end to conflict. And then it became an inspiration to international community to know that even if you have not been through so much, you don't know much, you're not exposed, local initiative works. And that's why we started our initiative to say, let's promote peace, because we are the biggest beneficiaries of peace that we are talking about. And we thought, bring an end to the suffering by promoting alternative to violence.
Right. And talking about peace, in an interview, you say that building peace with dignity is to answer human questions. These questions, do you think that change over time or remain the same for all generations?
It has not changed. The question of whether dignity and peace would mean to answer the human questions. It has not changed. The only thing that we have to realize that we have become a society of multicultural settings, where people are coming from diverse regions, speaking different languages, different colors, different tribes, different gender. And we became a society that is quite rich with experience, a society that is quite in need of cross-cultural learning. We needed to learn more. In addition to even talking about change, we want change, but we cannot change if you have not learned anything. So over the time, the human needs became so real, so apparent, and so now that we are not thinking about the future, but we're thinking about what is it now? So that would mean if we are to step in to address human suffering, we need to have a balanced outlook of gender, of staffing, of opportunities, of skill development, move away from theory to practice. We have already developed large amount of theories of change, but what about practices of change? This is to me what is more important. In the real world of today, it doesn't need a better theory of change, it needs better practice of change. The world as today, the reality of the world is no longer academic, no longer intellectual as it was to be. So the emphasis should be on skill development. We have to research, we have to learn, and we have to give ourselves a chance to learn as humanity. The human race has become more powerful and yet also more divided, more connected yet far away. And that's why somehow it has been manifested so very clearly in terms of when COVID came. It came and found the world as messy as it is. But also you have to say, in as bad as COVID has been, and it is still, we shouldn't forget about the learning that comes with it. There's so much learning that came with it that as a human race, whether we're black or white, or a woman, Europe, American, anywhere in the world, we are limited to life. We are vulnerable as a race, as a human race, we are vulnerable. And there is that moment in life when we are too powerless to protect our very own. And we wonder who can protect us. Even our MiGs and fighter jets cannot shoot and kill the virus. Even our money cannot buy our safety. Leave alone our color cannot separate us from disaster. So the whole thing is, I think somehow COVID became an equalizer to make people realize that we are the same. Let go the arrogance of white people, black people. Let go the arrogance of male, female, and let us remain the humility, come back to the humility of humanity. We are human, we are limited to life, and we are equally powerless. But we cannot wait and say that let us allow the suffering to continue in other parts of the world because it is far from us. As long as Europeans still felt that the suffering in Africa did not matter to them, that's where the world would go wrong. But we're saying Europeans and Americans and everyone should know that the suffering in Africa is a suffering in Europe, is a suffering in there. So in short, the suffering anywhere in the world is a suffering everywhere in the world. So that's the concept that we have to embrace, that we don't need to wait until suffering or disasters knocks our doorbell or knocks our doorpost in order for us to react. We need to react now. We have to step forward and say, as much as we are doing what we're doing, your suffering is my suffering. You don't have to wait until when it's knocking my doors, but we need to step up and prevent that suffering. So this is the world that we have reached. It's a world that is exhausting. And this is the kind of world that I feel it has taken so much of my energy because I've been working so hard. Sometimes I felt so alone. Sometimes I felt so unattended to, not listened to, because people think, this is Africa. They're suffering. Let them suffer. Why are they doing what they're doing? And we are allowed to suffer. We are left on our own. But the world has become emotionally confusing. It's very emotionally confusing, and it's exhausting because from door to door, we are seeing the suffering. But we have refused still to open our hearts for the good of one another.
Right.